is your Nina is your composer mentor for this program. You're going to have lessons as well as today's stuff with Nina, and we will be coordinating those lessons with you. We usually just do that sort of independently based on schedules, right, Nina?
Yeah, we'll have certain days assigned for lessons, and then we'll give you each a time slot based off of your schedules.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we'll be in touch with you about that. But yeah, so Nina, welcome so much. Thanks so for being here, and we'll turn it over to you. Is it recording now?
It's recording now.
Okay, great. I'll be in there. If you need anything, just come grab me. Otherwise, I'll see you all around 2:30 when we wrap up here.
Great, thanks, Brandon. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet those of you I haven't met yet. Some of you I have met before in previous years of this program. But as Brandon probably mentioned, I didn't catch the full intro, so I don't know what he mentioned. But this is I think this program is now in its sixth year, actually. And it's been a real joy to work with all of you students throughout this process. You know, this is a program that's meant for students who is their first time composing, all the way to students who have composed full orchestra symphonies or anything like that. So, you know, this is really meant to be very customizable, meant for you to have the opportunity to get some mentorship on, you know, composing, learning how to write for all these different instruments that are there in Bright Work, you know, getting the opportunity to have your work premiered by a professional ensemble and get to workshop your piece also in advance, which is not always the case usually whenever we write for professional ensembles. So Brightwork has been an amazing collaborator in this program and giving you all the opportunity to, you know, try something new and really get your work featured on a public stage. So I'm just going to kind of get started and talk about some kind of general things to sort of broaden our idea of what music even is in the first place. Ozzy, I just want to check
Yeah.
if I can share. Can you make me a co-host so that I can share my screen?
Sure. How do I do that? Sorry. Give me 1 second.
Maybe you have
Participant.
over name.
I think if you go to participants
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
then
participants. Yeah.
the
Oh, I
three
see.
dots. Oh,
More.
Make
Yeah, make co-host. There you go. That should
thank
work.
you.
Okay.
Yes, I think it is.
Okay.
Okay, let me just share
So,
my screen. Okay, what is music? All right. So if we had to define what is music, right? That is a big tenet of this program is that we're writing music. How would you define what music is? You can just raise your hand if you have any thoughts.
you gotta
Uh-huh.
wait.
I
I'm kind of on the side. I guess maybe like just like sounds that like people enjoy listening to.
Okay, so sounds that people enjoy listening to. Okay, so with that definition, right, there is a sense of like an action, right? There's something that's being put out there, but our response to that is that we are listening to it and that we enjoy it. Any other thoughts?
Guys.
Uh-huh.
I think some combination of pitches and rhythms that like I said, that have some kind of structure and tend to sound good together.
Okay, so the idea of structure, right? That there's some sort of almost like a scaffolding that all this material is put in. You mentioned the specific parameters like pitch and rhythm, and that is put into some sort of package that we can identify as music. Nico?
I think it's sound that has been put together specifically in by like a musician. So it doesn't have to be even specific pitches and rhythms. It can just be any sound
Mm.
as long as it's been intentionally set up in a way by a musician, I guess.
Okay, yeah. So now, Nico, you kind of broadened the definition a little bit, right? So any kind of sound, regardless. So I think we've actually started from a more specific definition and gradually broadened it with each response that you've given, right? So first we talked about enjoying the sounds. Then we talked about the idea of structure. And then now we're talking about things that are organized in a specific way and maybe these kind of specific parameters of enjoyment and like things like pitch and rhythm might not necessarily be as discernible in one type of music versus another. So this idea of organization is something that, has been talked a lot about in this idea of how to define what music is. So there is a famous composer named Edgar Varese who created this concept to kind of actually first describe his own music. But this has since become a way to define music in general. And he termed this or coined this term organized sound. So the idea of sound being organized in some sort of scaffolding, it's in some sort of a structure. As Nico mentioned, there's some idea of intention behind the sounds that is organized in some sort of way that we then listen to. Now, one thing that's interesting about that kind of definition is that it puts the onus on the music creator or the composer, right? So in this case, it's the composer's intention of how they're organizing sound. They decided it was organized, and then a listener then would hear it as music based off the composer's intentions. So I'm going to think of some kind of situations that could maybe challenge this definition a little bit. So, for instance, when we are walking outside and we hear birds chirping, bird song, would you consider that music or not?
Maybe.
I think usually, but it depends.
It depends. Uh-huh. Nico?
I guess it could be like music is in like artistic expression through sound, whether that be as the musician or as the listener. Because
Okay, so there is a difference, right, between the composer and the listener, right? And in some cases, there's also a performer who's like an intermediary, right, between all of these parameters. So one thing, going back to your answer of it depends, right? There's a lot of parameters that are involved when we're trying to define what music is. So there's this idea of layered identities happening, layered, like people who have different roles that are all layering to create a piece of music, which I think is pretty unique to our field in music. In a visual arts situation, like if you're going to an art gallery, oftentimes somebody will paint something and then that's at one point, and then later on in time, somebody else is viewing this painting. But in music, what's interesting is sometimes these things can all be happening at the same time. So in Western classical music, for instance, some of these parameters might change, or terms that we use to describe these various people might change if it's like a pop music context or other kinds of genres. But just to keep things simple, talking from a classical context, so we have us, right? We are the composer, or we can call it a music creator of some sort. Then there's a performer, right? So in this case, for this program, we have the performers in Brightwork music, and they will be interpreting whatever we give them, right? And then there's a listener, right? So then the listener is going to be interpreting what the performer interpreted from us, right? And then there's the space that a concert is being held in, right? So when a work is being heard, the acoustics of that space can sometimes change how we hear something, right? If a hall is really ringy and boomy, then a piece might sound really different than if a concert hall is really dry and kind of more close sounding. And all of that can really inform the way that we hear a piece of music. So there are all of these intersections that can happen, right? There's this relationship between the composer and the performer that informs something, relationship between the performer playing something live and the listener getting to hear what the performer is playing. There's all of these different intersections that we can't always control, right? That we're this little center of this whole circle, right? And there's all of these different parameters that can affect a piece of music. And if we think about that definition of organized sound, Perez's definition, as I said, this is a really composer-focused definition, right? It's the composer's intention to organize the sound in a particular way, and therefore it is music. But I think it's important to also realize the importance that the listener has in this equation. So who decides what actually is organized? What if the listener also has a say in deciding what is organized? If we walk outside and we hear bird song, the bird's intention often with, chirping is to communicate, right? It's often just dialogue with other birds, maybe like a mating call. It could be all the way that they're communicating with other birds, and they might not be actually thinking of it as music. But for us, if we are choosing to listen to it in a musical way, then maybe we might define it as music. And so I think that rethinking about this definition from both the composer's, intention, but also the listener's intention is important to define what music is. And so we can think of music as like a function of all of these different parameters, right? There's the importance of the performer in our music making process. There's the importance of the listener, of the space, of us, of course. And that can actually be something that is exciting. It can actually change the work creatively and cause us to create in a different way that explores all of these different elements. So if we think about one way to do this, we can think about the idea of a score, a piece of sheet music, and how does that actually interpret, or how does that shape what the music making experience is? So if we think about music, oftentimes we think about, actually make this full screen, maybe a little bit bigger. Oftentimes when we think about music, we sometimes think about scores that look like this, right? This is a piece by Bach, very famous piece. We see certain things on the score. Can anybody tell me what certain pieces of information are given with this score? Uh-huh.
The key signature and time signature.
Good. So the key signature and time signature, right? So there's certain guidelines about what sort of collection of pitches we're going to be working with, what sort of types of rhythms we'll be working with, and how they're organized. Anybody else?
The different voices.
Different voices, right? So we see that there's two lines, right, for two hands, and so each hand is playing a different line. Anything else? Uh-huh.
I guess there's the expression and there's also the name and also like the type of piece it is.
Good, right? So the title, right? The idea of this being a prelude. A prelude, if you think prelude, the word pre is in prelude, meaning before. A prelude is often like an intro piece to something else. So that can kind of give us some guidance about what the piece is like. In this case, also we have the composer's name. We can maybe kind of discern from other works of the composer. We see even their dates, meaning what era this piece was written in. Anything else that we notice? There's one thing towards the top I think is important.
I guess the tempo, but I don't think Bach put the tempo in for this. I think that's an editor's addition.
Yeah, so in this case, there's a tempo, right? It says moderato. There isn't a specific BPM marking or anything like that with this, but this is giving us a signal of approximately how fast this is played and maybe the feeling of the piece is like moderate, kind of more temperate. Now, I think you're bringing up is that Haydn? I don't know who's,
Yeah.
I couldn't see your face. Okay. Now, one thing that I think that you acknowledge that's important is the idea of an editor in this case, right? So in Bach's time, there was actually a lot of things that were left up to the performer's interpretation, and certain markings were not included. So for instance, you notice in here, there are no dynamic markings, right? No indication of how loud to play anything. That was left to the performer. And also, to be honest, there were certain limitations in the Baroque era of even what dynamic range instruments could even perform in. So that's part of it. But there was this element of improvisation that actually was present in the Baroque era that leaves certain parameters up to the performer. Now, that idea of this agency, like this push and pull between the composer and the performer that we're talking about, things that are left up to interpretation for the performer, is sometimes explored in a much more drastic way. So, for instance, other scores, not all scores look like this. You know, there are scores that sometimes look like this. This is a piece called Sonic Meditations by Pauline Oliveros. A lot of her work is kind of based off of improvisation. It leaves a lot of elements up to the performers, and she gives different types of indications that act as guidelines for performance, but it's not necessarily so strict. So a lot of her music are text-based scores. So text scores that give some sort of text information of how to perform the piece. So for instance, with this one, this is one movement of Sonic Meditations. It's called Tumbling Song, and you can read it. It says, make any vocal sound, but always go downward in pitch from the initial attack. The initial attack may begin at any pitch level. Go downward in a glissando or in discrete steps continuously. Go any distance in range at any speed, dynamic or quality, but the breath determines the maximum time length of any downward gesture. So in here we see, wow, there's a lot more up to interpretation, right? And things aren't necessarily so defined, right? There isn't necessarily specific, specifications on when a sound is supposed to occur, how long it's supposed to be, what pitch it's supposed to be at. But there is information about those parameters that are more general and guidelines on how to actually perform those parameters. So we see here, there's an indication about pitch. It says, go downward in pitch from the initial attack. So kind of like a glissando effect. It says, go any distance and range at any speed. So speed or tempo is talked about here. Dynamic or quality. So it could be loud or soft. It could be different kind of timbre, right? It could be like a rough sound or maybe something that's more gentle and breathier. But the breath determines the maximum time length of any downward gesture. So meaning based on how long we can hold our breath, that's how long the glissando figure should be. So let's hear an example of this recording or this movement. Okay. Let me share my screen. That'll make it better. Okay. Can you hear audio? save time. I'm gonna stop it there. So, what were some things that we noticed based off of the score?
I remember it said like make any vocal noise, but that wasn't all vocal. They had some string in there, I think, and even maybe piano. I couldn't tell.
Yes, right. So they are slightly deviating from this, right? This is not all vocal sounds. There are instrumental sounds that are being used. How did that affect what kinds of glissando figures they were performing?
Well, for piano, obviously you can't do like a smooth like interpolation. But although it did say you could, it said in discrete steps, right? So
Right.
yeah, so that's kind
Good.
of what the piano did, but yeah.
Good. So it talks about either discrete step glissandi or a smooth gliss. You had your hand up.
Yeah, I heard most of the instruments and vocals, there's some vocals were doing smooth continuous glissandos. There were some in the background, like Micah mentioned, that were doing step-by-step glissandos. But I think some of the instruments went down to a certain pitch and then reset. Or maybe it was a different same kind of instrument playing but a different version. But I think I did hear some resetting, I suppose.
Good, right? So even talking about how once you perform one glissando, how you go to the next one, right? And one thing that she specifies here is that the breath determines the maximum time length of any downward gesture. So obviously that would change if they're doing it on an instrument, right? So that could be, if it's a string instrument, it could be like the amount of bow that you're using. If it's on a piano, it could be when your hand decides to come off the piano when it's doing a glissando, right? There's other elements that are at play with instrumentals with this, but the idea of like when you do the next one, this idea of resetting, right? Do you go back to the same pitch? Do you go to a different pitch? Do you take a big breath and so that that one is longer? Is that one going to be shorter than the first glissando that you did? That's always an interesting question with this. And, with this kind of piece, when it is performed in a group and it is so open, right? So open in terms of what you're actually performing. There's a lot of improvisation involved with this. What is really important when you're performing in a group like this? What is essential when we're improvising?
I guess everyone has to be like on the same page. Like,
Uh-huh. Everybody should be on the same page.
by that I mean there should be an idea of like what you're going for
Mm-hmm.
among
Uh-huh.
everyone who's playing.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
This depends on the way that the orchestrator wants to do it, but I think at least in this arrangement, not everyone ended their downward glissandos at the same time. And I think that was the point in creating a certain kind of dissonant sound or like a cacophony of sounds. But I think if a certain orchestrator wanted to do something different, they could have everyone instead synchronize and end at the same point. And that would create a different texture to the music.
Right. So there's a difference between everybody thinking they're glissandi versus them staggering that. And they make that decision based off of listening, right? They need to listen to the other people in the group, right? And hear what they're doing and respond accordingly. So if that means wanting to be fully in sync and having it just be like distinct waterfall gestures, right? Like, woo, and then everybody's sinking, then that is a very different effect than if they're staggering it and making it feel like this continuous glissando where it's like you're falling or like sinking into the earth or something. Um, that's a very different feeling, right? And so it's important that we're listening when we're performing something like this. It's even more essential that we're aware with our ears of what is happening around us, and then we're responding in the moment based off of our environment. So some composers have done text-based scores like this, but there's other ways of creating. Is this gonna let me go to the next page? Yes. Okay. So there's also this idea of graphic scores, right? So graphic scores often use symbols, um, more graphic notation, pictures to communicate musical ideas. So in this, what are some different things we notice in this score? What kinds of elements are we seeing?
Oh, we're not seeing the score.
Oh, you're not
Hold
seeing
on,
the
let me.
score?
It's the,
Oh, let me reshare it.
We have to.
Is that working now?
Yeah. There we go. Okay.
Oh, okay. I think as I was sharing my screen earlier. Um, okay, cool. So what kinds of elements do we see in this graphic score?
Well, it's very colorful.
There's colors.
Lots of arrows. And like crowns and stuff.
Good, right? So already we see some different things from like our normal, like notated the Bach piece that we saw, right? So in here we see the idea of color, right? That's normally not included in most sheet music. We see arrows, right? Arrows have some type of direction, right? It's seeming like, oh, going backwards or going forwards, and that meaning something. We see these kind of crown figures. We can figure out what that means. Um, we see the idea of these other kinds of shapes, right? They're like these asterisk sign or star kinds of figures. This other kind of, I don't even know what to call this, some other kind of, shape, these circles and dots, these kinds of jagged lines like this. Um, and all of these might mean something, right? We also see this idea of direction, right? There's these layers, there's one layer and then it's separated by this and this and this. This in theory, this could mean this is where we start. We start from the top. I don't know. Can you see my mouse when I'm?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, cool. So we could start from this top layer and then maybe continue to the second layer and then the third one and then the fourth. Could also mean maybe there's 4 people performing and each one is assigned a layer and it goes left to right. It could mean different things like that. So this was actually made by some students in a youth program in New York, and they made a key. So in here we see some of those shapes mean different things. We see here that there's staccato figures that are dots. It kind of looks like normal staccato notation, but there's different sizes of them, right? So maybe the bigger ones could mean a louder dynamic. There's also the idea of some kind of bubbling sort of figure, vibrato figures with this kind of curvy line, air sounds they've notated with this shape, pizzicato or key clicks with this kind of star figure. The crown means solo. It's like you are the king for a while in that moment. But they also have color, right? So these different colors mean, in this case, based off of their key, it means different instruments. So depending on the color, you might play, if you're a string player, like a violinist, you might play in the pink parts and then the black parts, because that's for all people, and the blue parts. It depends on your instrument you play in those colored sections. So in this, we can interpret this based off of the key that they've given and play in those spots where our instrument's designated color is and the shape indicates the kind of technique that we should play. Now, any questions about this graphic score? No? Okay, I'm going to show another example. Let's do this. Share. Okay. Let's share. Okay, so I'm going to show another version of a graphic score. This was a piece written by a composer named Georgi Ligeti. It's an electronic piece. So something that's different here is that it's fully electronic and it's fixed electronics, meaning that the electronics were already done. He had actually made a score for this when he was composing the piece. But what's different about this is that usually a score you use to communicate to a performer something, right? Tell them what to play, when to play it. But in this case, it's already performed, right? It's already created. The sound is already done in the electronics. But in this piece, Ligeti actually worked with an artist collaboratively to make a separate score as almost like a way to interpret the piece. And notice what kinds of symbols you see and think about what those symbols might mean. Yes, full screen. All right, I'm gonna pause it here before more shapes get added. Okay, so tell me what kinds of things we saw in the score and what you think they might mean. I'm actually gonna share the full score. Is this working? Yes. Okay. All right. So what kinds of things did we see in the score and what do you think they might mean?
There's the different shapes, which I think are probably the different sounds, like not instruments, but like the different sound.
Good, right? So there's different types of shapes, right? We see these dots, we see these kind of curves, we see these, they kind of almost look like combs, like this, or like the letter E almost, like those kinds of shapes here. What do you think the size of those, each of those shapes mean?
It seemed like that was like
Like the amplitude.
yeah.
Good, right? So the volume of it, right? Some of them, if they're louder, they might be bigger shapes than others. If they're softer, they might be smaller ones. What about, if we looked at it's a bit blurry this picture, but if we looked at this as like a graph, you notice in the YouTube video there was on this like the x-axis. What was that representing horizontally?
The time.
Yeah.
Time, right? It told you at this many seconds this occurs. So it's giving us a sense of the temporal nature, like the time. What about the y-axis or vertical?
that like the pitch
Like the
range?
pitch,
Yeah.
It sounds-
Pitch range, right? So higher sounds were up here versus lower sounds were down here. Now, he also actually gives us a key. Oh, let me make this smaller. Okay, it's in German, so we might not know everything what this means, but certain colors mean different things, right? So in this case, the yellow means some type of sine tone. They also tell us the frequency of certain types of sounds. So maybe this orange kind of figure means a particular sound that comes in. There's different types of filters for the different types of sounds that are used in this. So this is indicating, say, like third filter means 3 prongs on the, it looks like a fork almost. There's different types of these shapes that are included. And it gives us a guide to how the score is created and what everything means on it. So there are some composers who do work with graphic notation. They might also combine, traditional notation with graphic notation to kind of give more flexibility in terms of the kinds of music that they're creating. And I'm actually going to show an example of one of them right now. So does anybody know what this piece is? I don't know if the title is on here. Does this look familiar to anybody? Okay, this is a piece called In C. It's by Terry Riley. It was written in the 60s and it kind of became very famous because it was sort of a new concept, this idea of working with a modular type of score. So basically what this means is that an ensemble will perform this, but each member of the ensemble can choose when they want to move on to the next figure. So these are called cells. So maybe they all start with this cell, and then maybe one member of the ensemble will already move on to the next one. Each performer can choose when they want to move on to the next part. And there isn't necessarily any rule of when you move on to it. And then once you get through all of the cells, then you're done with the piece. So I'm going to play a little recording of this and then we can look at the score. And I want us to kind of follow along with the score and see when are people moving on to the next cell. But let me just want to make sure I can share 2 things at once. Sound. Okay. All right, I'm gonna pause it there. Many times these performances of this piece could go on for 40 minutes. So, uh, tell me what you noticed about this. Do you know how far we got in the score?
Like 10?
10, yeah.
10?
Uh-huh. Yeah, about 10, right? So, what did you notice about the performance?
I mean, I think a lot of them deviated from the score. They like added their own things to some of them.
What kinds of things did they add?
Like there was some like octave displacement, I think, for some of them.
Yeah, right.
Somewhat.
Yeah, so I cut out there's a set of info notes that Terry Riley gives also of the performance. And one of the things he mentions is that octave displacement is allowed, based off of different instruments. Some of them, might not actually, this might not be the right range for them. Some if it's like a double bass or something, right? This might be really high in this particular octave, so they can play it octave lower. I think one thing that was really obvious was when the piano was playing this figure right here. It's like, blah, blah, blah. It was really low, right? It was suddenly a very different register than everything else. What else did you notice about this? Uh-huh.
I think a lot of the rhythms were like offset from each other within a measure. Like you wouldn't have each of the instruments be playing the same measure at the same time. And that sort of like leading into each other makes the piece really mesmerizing in my opinion, and doesn't make the listener bored because there's always something going on. There's always something that's leading into the next thing.
Good. So this is kind of like what you were talking about. I think you were the one who brought up about with the Pauline Oliveros, like the idea of staggering the glissandi, right? So in this, I think what makes this piece interesting and engaging to listen to is that when people are performing it, they're not all switching at the same time, right? So in the beginning, we heard there's this kind of like bump, 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 bump figure, which is like it's called an ostinato. It's something that is repeating constantly. It is kind of holding everybody together rhythmically. It's like the glue of the piece. And then suddenly when this comes in, this first cell, this ba-dum kind of figure, that, already it's like a new element. But because people are constantly moving to new elements at different times, it's not like everybody's moving to the next thing together. Each combination is always unique, right? So anytime this work is performed, there's a difference, right? One person might go on to cell two in 30 seconds. One person might go on, another group might have somebody go on to cell two in 2 minutes later. Each performance is unique of this, or each performer, what was I saying? Each performance is unique in the way that they do this. And I think that that makes it really engaging. What is one thing that maybe unifies all of these cells? What makes everything kind of work together?
They're all like within around the same, they all playing the same notes basically. So, and they're all notes that sound like pretty good together.
Uh-huh, good.
It's
So
not,
if we remember, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that it's not very like dissonant. There isn't like any like way out of key notes or anything.
Yeah, so if we remember, this piece is called In C. It is
Yeah.
in C major, right? So at this beginning, everything, it's the notes are C, E, F, G, finally later on, we didn't get to it when we were playing it. They introduced this F sharp, which is maybe adding a little bit of dissonance, right? That doesn't normally belong in C major. Um, but I think that the way that this piece is constructed is careful in the way that they're introducing this dissonance, right? So that when it comes in, it doesn't really shock the listener. And if everything feels like it's part of the same sound world, and this is just adding more tension, it's like adding a new element to the piece to keep it interesting by the time that this F sharp finally comes in. So Another thing you might notice is that the cells are different length, right? So some of them are really short, like this one, 10 is only 2/16 notes versus cell 6 or 8 is, there's a 6, 10, 14 beats long, so because the cells themselves are different lengths, then that allows it to kind of layer in a much more unique way than if they were all, 2 beats long. Yeah, so this piece, this was a very seminal piece. It's a piece of minimalism that really, it really informed that music. Other minimalist composers are Philip Glass, Steve Reich. I think some of you who were in this program last year, we looked at clapping music by Steve Reich, and a lot of this was very influential to that whole era of music. Okay, I want to wrap up by showing a piece for the instrumentation that you all are writing within, which is a quartet, right? So some of you are writing for subsets of the quartet. I chose the instrumentation assignments based off of if you were in the program, if you already written for some of these instruments before I gave you the quartet. Some of you were really interested in your responses of writing for certain instruments versus another. So I made the assignments kind of based off of that. But I want to give you just some things to feed on and feed your imagination while you are thinking about how to write for these instruments. You're going to have sessions with all of the players specifically on their instruments so you can get a sense of what all they can do. But this is a piece. Let's find it. Okay, so this is a piece by a composer named Paul Novak. He's actually pretty young. I think he might be in his late 20s. And it is for the instrumentation of clarinet, violin, cello, and piano. And I chose this because you're all writing within this group. So notice certain things you see in the score. There's a lot of specificity about different techniques being used, different dynamics, different ways to change the timbre or the tone color of the sound. Notice what all you see in the score, and then we'll talk about it. I'm gonna pause it there so we have time to talk about it. So what kinds of things did you notice on the score?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of change in meter, which I mean, it is not irregular, but I liked it. I thought it sounded very cool.
Yeah, so there's a lot of changes in meter, right? So let me see if I can find right here. See, each bar is going from 5/8, which already 5/8 is kind of an irregular meter, right? Usually we're used to things in groups of 2 or 3. Um, so we have a 5/8 bar, and then we have a 2/4 bar, and then immediately going to a 5/8 bar, right? It kind of keeps us on our toes rhythmically, right? It keeps shifting the beat in a different way. I can see here it's also going to a 7/8 bar right after that. So it kind of keeps the beat constantly moving. Any other thoughts?
Uh,
Uh-huh.
I
Or
noticed
either of you.
that almost all the instruments were in a fairly high register most of the piece. Like even the piano and the cello.
Good, right? So the idea of thinking about register, so everything is really high in the piano, um, and that creates kind of a different timbre of the sound, right? It has a different effect. It's almost kind of more playful when you're playing up there versus playing down. And the moments where the loud piano hits happen that are low, if you notice what tends to happen, they're in sync with the cello, right? When the cello, then sometimes they'll do this is called a snap pizzicato or a Bartok pizzicato. Those of you who are writing for violin and cello in your lessons will talk more about string writing and specific techniques, but you can see that they always coordinate whenever they're playing this. So it's a real like it's almost like a stab kind of sound, right? When they're both doing it at the same time. Any other thoughts as we wrap up? Uh-huh.
Yeah, there's a lot of staccato in all the instruments. And also I noticed the piece doesn't really conform to a specific key signature, except for that kind of like root bass note on the piano and cello, like the C octave we're talking about. But a lot of accidentals.
Good, right? So first you talked about articulation, right? So there's a lot of staccato here, kind of creates this more playful, almost like a dance-like quality to it. But also there's no key signature, right? So unlike, oh, if I can just quickly look at the beginning, if this is gonna here we notice that, I mean, it kind of looks like it's in C, but actually it's open basically. So this is a lot of composers actually choose not to use the key signature if they're working with a lot of dissonance, a lot of accidentals like this, because it just makes things simpler. Um, and so that allows him to have more flexibility in terms of harmony and using chromatic notes. And so that he can use dissonance as much as he's using in this piece. All right. Wow. I ended right at 5:31. Or sorry, I'm on East Coast right now, so it is 2:31 for you. But you all are gonna have a great workshop. You're gonna have sessions with Brightwork members right now, and other elective workshops. But I'm excited to work with all of you. It's been such a joy getting to work with all of the students throughout. I think we've had probably over 50 students being through this program. So it's really exciting to hear the work that you're going to come up with. And I'm excited to meet all of you in lessons very soon. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Ozzy.
Sure thing. Just give me 1 second. I'm gonna hit stop on the record button. Let's see. So